Good evening, Mia.
Suki, how are you?
I can't hear you, Mia. Can you hear me?
Hold on.
Oh, I hear you now.
You hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I'm here.
Good
I thought
evening,
I had
Alicia.
I thought I had an audio
Good
problem for a
evening.
sec.
Hi,
Hey, Miss
what's up?
Floyd, how
Yes,
are
it's
you?
nice to see you. I'm fine. Did you guys get that presentation?
Yes, I did. And I replied to Mia. I don't know if Mia forwarded you my
Yeah.
reply that when we're talking about UAP, it would be nice if you can maybe take 5 minutes to present some of that.
Well,
Um,
the problem is, Suki, is I won't be able to stay all day. I only have 45 minutes. So
Mm.
if you don't mind, I might not be here for that. So if it's possible, I can do it earlier in the meeting and then you guys just hold on to that information.
Yeah,
Is that
if you saw from the agenda, we'll be talking about the UAP high density proposals first. Um,
okay?
we already did talk about them some, but there's a lot to go over there. So, you can definitely present that. And yeah,
Okay, so I just and Mia, you have the presentation because I
Yeah,
did send it in my email request, and obviously I can't pull it up here.
okay. Suki, I don't have the email up, I think. Is it possible for you to do the screen sharing, Suki?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
I mean, what I would say is, we talked about the vacancy rates and things like that during the ULERT meeting, and we may talk about it again. So maybe hold that for the ULERT meeting, and we'll maybe just focus on like what you were saying about the vacancy rates at different income levels.
Hmm.
I think that's quite important in relation to City of Yes and what the City of Yes proposals are going, AMI level proposals are going to be. Um, and then if anyone wants a copy of the presentation, obviously they can ask me and you can email it to them, per the usual procedure.
Okay, got it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we'll just wait a few more minutes for people to join. Hi, John. Hi, Ronisha. Hi, Nicola. Hi, Tara. Hi, Andrew. And Colin, you're joining us today too. Hooray. Colin, we can't hear you. Oh, let's see. Is Colin? Hi, Colin.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me.
And Colin, are you joining us as Colin or are you here to help me out?
Yeah, I can't unmute myself, but yeah, I'm a little bit of both.
Okay, wonderful. Okay.
Suki, Nicola has her hand raised.
Okay, yeah, I think we'll get started. It's 7:07. Nicola, is there anything quick before we get started?
Yes, since it's just us, can we try to have the meeting without everyone being forced to unmute themselves each time? It helps with the discussion. It's very distracting not being able to just freely talk.
I understand. So this is actually it is a larger meeting. It's a joint meeting between housing and ULURP. And I see we do actually have members of the public with us, or we did. So we'll stick with the mute. And just bear with me because it's also very distracting when people speak out of turn. So I think we'll stick with that for now and we'll see how it goes. But yeah, I understand. Okay, so we're gonna get started and just welcome everyone. This has been billed as a joint meeting for housing and ULURP. The chair of housing, Erin, told me she won't be able to come tonight, and I think she will be holding a separate meeting for housing for you all to discuss your separate housing issues. But I think we both felt that it was very important, and a member of the housing committee had requested that we do a joint meeting because the city of Yes for Housing Opportunity is going to have such a major impact on housing citywide. So that said, let's dive right into this. I want to start by going over again. The last couple of times we've talked about the universal affordability preference, which is the proposal that's being directed towards all of the higher density districts in the city. Those are the R6B and above districts. And I sent out I sent out the informational videos from city planning as well as the 2023 HPD AMI charts. So is there anyone who's watched the video who wants to give us a summary of the UAP proposals? And just, if you could just give us the summary first, just give us the facts first, and then you can give us your opinion afterwards. And then everyone can jump in and give their opinion. And just quick rules of order thing, if you want to speak, raise your hand. You can click on the reactions button and there's a hand raise that you can click on it. Or if that's not working for you, just put up your hand and wave if you're on camera. So is there anyone who wants to share with everyone else just a quick summary? Because there's people who were not here the first time. Anybody? John Wolfling, you have your hand up. Okay, go ahead, John.
So you mentioned that you sent out links to videos. I'm not going to try to watch them now, but I can't seem to find that in my inbox in my email stream. When did you send that out?
Okay, I guess it's because you're not actually a member of the subcommittee. But if you did watch the video, and these are the videos from city planning, the public information sessions, and you'd like to share with everyone else, feel free. Teresa, I see you. Did you want to summarize for us?
Yeah, I would like to see what you're talking about. Isn't everything that's discussed in the meeting supposed to be posted somewhere online? I don't see it.
Okay, so it is posted on the agenda, which me and Khaled, I don't know, did you guys post the agenda?
The videos?
The
Um, the-
videos are not, the videos were sent out in a link to the video. Okay, so first of all, Dante sent out links to the videos the information sessions months ago to every board member, because these are public information sessions. But as a reminder to my subcommittee members, I sent out links to the videos. But every board member should have gotten a notice from Dante about the public information sessions months ago. That I know for sure.
So this is YouTube videos?
These, yes, they're on YouTube, right? The public information sessions are live, and afterwards they're put up on YouTube on City Planning's channel.
All right, so I definitely went to those sessions, so. All right, I just had no idea what you were talking about. Thank you.
Okay, so do you or anyone else care to summarize the universal affordability preference program for us, or otherwise I can do it? Tara?
I'm just trying to turn my mic off. I'm playing music. I don't want to.
Okay. So if you went to the session, I know many of you did, and you want to summarize what it is for us in a few minutes, that would be great. Otherwise, I'm going to get started and do that because it's 7:15. Okay. So I'll summarize this for you guys. The universal affordability preference would increase the zoning density for all of the medium and higher density zoning districts citywide, provided that the developer gives a certain percentage of affordable housing. Now, there are two key things that have not been defined yet. First of all, they have not stated what would be the minimum percentage of affordable units, although it looks like they're kind of implying it might be 20%. And the second thing is they have not defined the AMI level at which the affordability would take place. They've suggested in the last meeting that it would be somewhere below 80% of AMI, but they haven't specifically defined it. They also haven't specifically defined, and this was among the questions that I sent to City Planning yesterday, whether this would only apply to buildings with a minimum number of units. Because, for example, the mandatory inclusionary housing program only applies to buildings of 10 units or larger. And you can see why that would be, right? Because if you're requiring 20% of the units to be affordable and it's smaller than 10 units, what are you going to have, like 1.5 units or 1 unit, right? So, with the MIH program, there was a minimum number of required units. And with the affordable independent residences for seniors, there was a minimum number of affordable units that had to be provided, period. I think according to an article that Esteban sent me, it had to be a minimum of 10 units. So if you combine that, for example, with a minimum percentage of 20% of units, then that would only apply to buildings of, say, 50 units or larger. But they haven't said that explicitly in the draft scope of work, which I also sent out to the subcommittee members. So there's a number of things that have not been defined yet. But what we do know is how the zoning density would be increased for each zone. And it is anywhere from about 15% zone increase in the number of units, and let's say 2 stories in height, to about 60% increase in the number of units, and maybe like 3 stories in height from the usual quality housing. So one thing that we talked about the last time, because it's very relevant to our district, is that the zoning district that is slated for the highest increases in density, the greatest increases in the number of units, is the R6 non-contextual on narrow streets, where you would see about a 60% increase in the number of units that could be built. And we know that most of our district is in R6, and that most of them are already underbuilt relative to the zoning. We're already seeing demolitions and large additions on top of buildings. So this zoning change would obviously further accelerate that, assuming that these developers would want to take advantage of that affordable housing bonus. And that's sort of a key piece of that too, is that this is not a mandatory zoning change. This is a voluntary zoning change. So the developer is obviously going to have to look at whether that zoning increase makes sense for them relative to whether the having to provide a certain number of units that are capped in terms of the rent, what they would lose there. So I asked all of you to look at the HPD 2023 AMI levels. I think Alicia, that maybe that was also going to be part of Alicia's presentation. So either I can share that, or I can ask Alicia to share that. You know what, I think I'm going to show you guys the page because it actually shows you at all the levels. Hold on a second. Okay. Okay. Well, you know what? I can't find it right now. So you know what? I'm gonna let Alicia go ahead and start screen sharing because I think she's gonna talk about some of the HPD AMI levels and also what their housing and vacancy survey showed about where the highest need is in terms of income levels. So Alicia, go ahead. And Mia, I don't know if you can allow her to screen share. If you can take about 5 minutes to do that.
Ms. Boyd, you should be able to share right now. So you just have to unmute her.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so what I did was look at the HPD surveys and the vacancy survey that they did, because the mayor and developers, along with their architects and other support staff, have been bragging about the fact that our vacancy rate is under 1%. And so I looked at the vacancy rates and as well as the other data to determine if the city of Yes target population, the proposed target population, will actually address this issue. So as you can see here on this first page, the vacancy rates for people who pay $1,000 or less is at 0.39%. So there's a serious crisis with that. and rents between 1,100 to 1,649 is at 0.91%. However, rents that are $2,400 or more is at a 3.39%. So there's no serious crisis with the 2,400. We've always been below 5% vacancy rate in New York City since the rent stabilization laws have went into effect, which are in effect because of the 5% or less. So the 3.39 is not such a dire number. It's more of the 3.39% that is the dire number. So clearly, you know, we should be targeting people who make $25,000 or less, because only 6% of those people who make $25,000 or less have the probability of finding an apartment. That's a very small percentage of the people. And also, they also made the claim that apartments that are $1,500 or less are actually accessible to the middle class. So the middle class in New York City would benefit from apartments that are $1,500 or less. Then they went to the vacant apartments. They showed that there were over 200,000 apartments that were vacant in New York City, about 70,000 of them just sitting empty, whereas 123 needed some minor work, like, you know, a refrigerator or a stove or a countertop or a new kitchen. And then the other 60,000 were just occasionally used. So they're not even being used on a year-round basis. So then we looked at the rent burden statistical analysis. And here, you know, you talk about people who make less than $70,000 or normally pay about 50% or more of their rent. So that's a severe rent burden. So obviously you will be targeting people who make less than $70,000 if you want to target the severe rent burden. And it even gets worse for people who are very poor. If you're making $25,000 or less, 85% of those people are severely rent burdened. So that means one particular incident in their lives, you know, that require emergency funds, they could be out in the street if they didn't pay their rent and wind up doing the emergency fund, you know, having to take care of something financially emergency. They don't have resources. They don't have bank accounts. These are the people who are at most risk. And so clearly you would want to target your population for people who make $70,000 or less, with a specific emphasis on people who are making $25,000 or less. Unfortunately, what we found out was that the city of Yes is targeting 80% of the average median income. And so they're still negotiating that. They said that they haven't actually decided on that number. They're just kind of throwing it out there. You would think that they would have a number by now, but they don't. But let's look at those AMIs for that 80%, because that's where they're claiming they can do. Right now, one person who's making $79,120 could now afford a $2,537 apartment. So immediately off the bat, the 80% is not going to address the most severe rent. It's not going to address the 3.9 vacancy rate or the 0.91 vacancy rates. They're not going to address that. This 80% AMI is going to again target that 3.39% of people who really don't have a serious issue with, you know, vacancies. And then with 2 people, it's 90,000. With 3 people, it's 101,000. With 4 people, it's 112. And as you can look at that chart, you see the rates. So we're talking about apartments that go for 2,500, 3,000, 3,000. So clearly, during their target population of 80% AMI, no way will it address our housing crisis, because we're not targeting the people who are in crisis. And finally, I just wanted to, Suki was talking about that presentation. In that presentation, the Department of City Planning itself stated that the 80% would not, and I repeat, would not cover the vacancy issue that we have. It says, and I will quote what she stated, "We recognize that 80% AMI doesn't meet the needs of New Yorkers who need affordable housing, especially as AMIs have risen dramatically in recent years." This is Winnie Sheen, a housing planner with DCP, that stated this at the session. So even the Department of City Planning is saying that the 80% target will not in any way, and we've seen that. We've seen the MIH program come into the community since 2016, 17, and it has done nothing. At that time, when the MIH program came in, we had a vacancy rate of about 1.5%. Now we're at 0.39% for that same population that is the most needy. So clearly our trajectories of it not being affordable have consistently been that it's not affordable. The target populations are not affordable to the most needy. And thus this upzoning, this massive e-zoning will in no way impact or reduce our housing prices. If anything, it will increase the housing prices as these high-end apartments come into low-income communities and causing gentrification and displacement. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Alicia.
Okay, I will stop sharing. And those there's some other videos you're welcome to see on my website about the City of Yes. Okay, I'm gonna stop. And okay. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this presentation. Unfortunately, I will not be able to stay for the entire meeting, but I hope that as we move forward in this discussion that we take into effect that the City of Yes proposal will not address our housing crisis. Thank you.
Thank you for that. John, you wanted to speak?
Yes, please.
So that was actually that's a wonderful presentation. I'm glad Alicia put that together. It's very informative, and I agree with just about everything that she said. I think we have a real affordable housing crisis, and I actually think rent burdened percentage is actually 33% of a family's income, not 50%. So the problem is even more acute than those numbers that that Alicia shared. So it's a great analysis, and I absolutely agree that when you get to the lower tiers of AMI, the vacancy is even worse. So I think the thing to do is to advocate for income averaging, and this is kind of a wonky term. But what I would like to recommend is that as a group, we consider that the AMIs are not pegged at 80%. Because as Alicia very rightly pointed out, that only targets a small sliver of the need and doesn't really address the deep affordability that really needs to happen for our city to be a fair and equitable place. So that income averaging will allow for lower incomes to be included along with higher incomes, and you can't have the higher income without the lower income. So that's a way to start to target those really, really deep affordability units. So Alicia, I want to thank you for putting that together. I think it was very informative. It was very accurate. That was good work. And I think the solution is not to say no to housing opportunity and the UAP program. It's to advocate and really work to get income averaging so that there can be a blending of AMI within these buildings. I'll make one other point, and that is that in one of the pieces of information that was sent out, it was either Dante or maybe someone sent it out. There was an FAR chart that was included, and it actually does indicate the affordability increment, which is basically the increment between the standard housing FAR and the heirs FAR. So that affordability increment is defined, but you're absolutely right. The AMI has not been defined. So that's that's where the you got to look at the fine print and figure out what the AMI is. So that's my piece. I hope it was received well by some of you.
Thank you, John. Alicia?
I just have to say that that same rationale was given during the MIH implementation. Like, we have to have this range of affordability, you know, we have to have the low and the median and the moderate. And then there were choices that the developer was allowed to do. That didn't work. Unless you save 20% or 30% of the AMI, then nothing else is going to work. All that averaging is just another excuse for developers to say, oh, yes, but we got 30% in there, and oh, we got 50% in there. But when you pay attention to the fine print, the option to choose that is there. It's not a requirement. When you put 30% of AMI, that is a requirement. When you say, oh, I'm going to average it out, you know, based upon some unknown parameters, like, oh, let's include Crown Heights with Prospect Lefferts Gardens. And let's average that out, and we'll get ourselves, you know, what the average of this community is getting. We still will not target the population that needs to be targeted. Because the moment you include people like John, wealthy white people in our neighborhood against Black and poor people, the average winds up skewing towards them. So don't go for the average. That does not, it hasn't worked. It didn't work on the MIH. It's not going to work here. Demanding, you know, a 30%, 50%, that should be a no-brainer, but it's not. It's not a no-brainer, and they're not going to change it. They're going to continue through this process saying that they're still working on it. Watch my words. By the time this project gets to the Department of City Planning Commission's table, they're still going to say, we're still working on it. We're working on it. You don't have any problem working on the FAR, the increase in heights, but you're going to be working on the target population.
Thank you, Alicia. Esteban?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I
Okay,
can.
great. So I know I've said this a couple of times in previous meetings, but I just want to stress this again. The most recent sort of example that we have of working with these kinds of numbers with city planning is the Atlantic Avenue rezoning, and they absolutely bait and switched that community. They acted in bad faith. It's very clear. Everybody knows it. Everybody says it. They came back with numbers that were just absolutely inadequate, and not at all based on the process that people had engaged in for a year. And this is a pretty engaged community that has considerable amount of power in that district, and they still came back with just absolutely atrocious affordability numbers that just were not acceptable. And so, while I think it's always good to fight for better, but just keep in mind that I don't think that this administration is going to be bargaining in good faith for this, and we need to keep that in mind when we're deciding how we're going to approach it.
Okay, thank you, Esteban. Janice?
Good evening, everyone. I'm just a little curious to know. First of all, I want to say that Alicia did an excellent presentation. She made it clear and simple. And basically, what I understand it to be is that most of the housing that is going up does not meet the needs of those who are making incomes of less than 70, 80,000, less than $70,000. So if anyone's making less than $70,000, what I understand is that they can forget about moving in all these apartments that are going up. So I just wanted to make that comment. And then I wanted to put a question out there, which is regarding the AMI. Now, I know that Alicia presented based on the 2023 AMI levels. I'm just wondering, what are the 2024 AMI levels? Have they been determined, and what impact do the 2024 levels have upon the construction that is going up, or are the construction companies still using 2023? I'm a little be bewildered about that. I'm not sure I understand what's going on. And I do agree the AMIs should be adjusted, but I know that's something with HPD, I think, right? Or HUD or something. So can someone clarify for me, please?
Yeah, I think maybe we can ask Mia to reach out to HPD to ask if the 2024 levels have been released yet, and if that is what will apply to buildings that are going to come online in 2024.
Yeah, I'll request the information and I'll send it to both the housing and subcommittee.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
John, and then I have a comment actually.
So I agree that everyone should go into these discussions with city planning with a certain degree of suspicion based upon track record. But I want to, I think, make the point that what we're currently doing, our current housing policy and the way that we've been operating for the last 10, 15, 20 years is not helping the problem. It's only getting worse. So I think as a community, we need to try to make a change. So I just to come out of this process with nothing changed, with no productive conversation, with no productive changes, is an abdication of responsibility. So just want to make that point.
Okay, point well taken. So my comment is that even if we assume that the income averaging is mandatory and that it's being done correctly and appropriately, it does mean that the overall percentage of what we would consider to be affordable housing, if maybe that's for someone who's making $50,000 a year, or a household that's making $50,000 or $60,000 a year, that percentage is actually very small, right? Because the overall percentage of income restricted housing is still going to be fixed at whatever it is, 20% or 25% or 30%. So if you now allow income averaging, right, so that let's say you want to you want your average to fall at 80%. And so you allow 15% to be at 100% of AMI, which we all agree is not affordable. It's probably above market rate in some cases. And then you want 15% to be at 60% of AMI or 40% of AMI or whatever the case is. You really only have 15% affordable housing. So I think that needs to be weighed against some of these density increases, which, as I said, in our community would actually be extreme. It's not going to be 15% affordable housing in exchange for a 15% density increase. It's 15% affordable housing in exchange for a 60% density increase. So that's the point that I wanted to make. Alicia?
I just wanted to, Janice, I just wanted to say that the AMIs are constantly being updated by HPD. There is a website that you can go to and click on it. But what we can be assured of as a Department of City Planning and stated during their hearing is that it's just going to keep increasing. It's not going to go down. So yes, these are the 2023 because that's what they've done. They probably will wait sometime in the mid-year to do, to do it again, to update it to 2024. But there is a website, and unfortunately there's no chat here, so I can't give you that link. But if you just Google HPD AMI or AMI HPD, you'll be able to find that chart and hold on to it. Janice, just a personal note, unfortunately, I can't send you a text, but I would really appreciate it if you would attempt to get in contact with me because I need to speak to you. My email address is info, INFO, at mtopp.org. Again, info, INFO, at mtopp.org. And if you could give me an email, throw me an email. I really would appreciate it. It's more on a personal matter. So, thanks.
Okay, I'm going to try to share the HPD chart because you're going to see, so it's the 2023 levels, and you're going to see that even below 80%, the AMIs are quite high. 70%, for example, for a family of three is actually $88,000. And that's versus the median income in our district, which I believe as of 2022, the American Community Survey has it at $77,000. So that is still much higher than our community income. It's not until you get down to 60% that you're at the median income. But I don't actually think that saying that housing that's for someone at the median income is affordable housing. That's, in my opinion, market rate housing is supposed to target the median family if you have a healthy housing market, right? We shouldn't need subsidies for the median family. So to me, only AMIs that are below our median income level are truly, which is, the 40 and 50% AMI level are truly affordable. And I'm trying to find, here we go. Okay. Okay, is that working? Can you guys see it? Okay, here we go. All right, so you can see the chart here that for a family of three, which is the typical city household, the 70% of AMI level is $89,000. For a family of four, it's $100,000. Right, for a family of three, 60% of AMI is 76,000, which is just about our district's median income. But it's not until you get down to the 50% and 40% of AMI levels that this is really what we would think of as below market rate housing or low income housing for our district. Okay. So the other point that I wanted to make, which has been raised repeatedly in a lot of our meetings, is people would like to see, city planning is saying that this is designed to help districts like ours that are seeing overdevelopment because it's going to ask everybody everywhere to do a little bit more housing. But this is not actually the case. Some districts like ours are going to do a lot more housing than other districts. So I actually did a map. This is based on city public records. On building lot sizes, built what's already been built. Just like we went through a couple of sessions ago, you can look at what's already built, you can look at the lot size, and you can look at the zoning, what's allowed to be built, and determine what could be built. So if you look at the draft scope of work, it shows you the zoning increases that are allowed under UAP for every zoning district. And so based on that, we were able to calculate which districts would be building how many new housing units each district would be building, and what kind of percentage increase that represented over the amount of as of right development that could happen. So you can see that obviously these low density districts that really have no higher density zoning, the R6 and R7 districts, they're not going to be adding any new units under the Universal Affordability Program, which when we start to discuss some of the low density changes, you'll understand that that means that all of these districts are not being asked to build affordable housing, right? The districts that would see the highest increases are Crown Heights. This is East New York and Bronzeville. This is Borough Park. this is a district in the Bronx. I'm not sure which one it is. It could be Melrose. And then there's a bunch of districts in between that are seeing fairly significant increases, actually. It's 10 to 30%. And 10% increase in the amount of housing units is usually considered the point at which an EIS considers that very significant for factors like secondary displacement, and really changing the demographics of a neighborhood. And in our case, when it's added to the amount of as right development, it really is very overwhelming. It really would almost double the number of housing units that we have. So, you can understand why they've said they have to do an EIS and why it's very important that we pay attention to that when it comes out. Because this is really striking citywide, and it's even more striking that the development is being concentrated in what we know are some of the poorest districts. Borough Park is very low income, East New York, Bronzeville. And on top of that, because of the voluntary structure of this affordability preference, they're not going to do it in Park Slope, where median income is 120,000. They're not going to do it in Brooklyn Heights and Williamsburg, where median income is 110,000, because they're just losing too much money on the market rate units to want to do the affordable housing, even at 80% of AMI, for the 20% bonus. So, that's going to concentrate all of the density even more in the poorest districts of the city, which I think is a very serious problem. It's possibly like some type of fair housing issue. It's and these are also obviously majority minority districts, so there's fair housing issues there. The Where We Live HPD housing policy document really was about spreading the burden to wealthier, whiter areas, which this obviously doesn't do. So that's all I have on that. I just want to make sure that you guys were aware of that. Anybody? So I'll stop there. Okay, so any other comments before we move on to the low density proposals?
So I'll just give you my perspective. I work with a lot of developers, as I've been accused of doing.
We can't hear you very well.
How about that?
That's better.
Okay, so thank you. So I have been accused of working with developers, and I'm an architect, so I work with developers. I will tell you the statement that you said about not building the affordable units, I don't really think that's true. I think whether it's Park Slope, whether it's Soho, whether it's Midtown Manhattan, if there is floor area to be built, the developer will use it. They'll use it, and it's more beneficial to build those units. The incremental cost to build those units is minimal. So I take issue with that statement that we're not going to see affordable units built in wealthier neighborhoods, because it's just not the reality of how development happens.
I mean, I'm not saying that those districts are not building any affordable housing, but what we're seeing is that they're being built under neighborhood-wide MIH rezonings, for example, in Gowanus. But keep in mind that the MIH rezonings have much, much higher density increases than this UAP program. So for example, the typical MIH rezoning is asking for a 200 to 300% increase in density, not a 20% increase in density, not a 60% increase in density. So the question I would ask you is whether voluntary inclusionary housing bonuses have produced any affordable housing in those districts in recent years, since the incomes went up as much as they did. I mean, I think we should look into that.
So you ask a good question. But every time that I've worked on a VIH, a voluntary inclusionary housing site, the design brief from my client, from the developer, has been to build to that maximum floor area and utilize the voluntary inclusionary housing program with all of the kind of warts that come with it, having to go to HPD, having to have those regulatory agreements. They are willing to build that floor area because it's beneficial to them.
But in what districts are these taking place? Like, is it taking place in Park Slope and Tribeca?
There's one in downtown Brooklyn that we worked on. There's one in Hallett's Point, Queens that we worked on. There's a handful of mandatory that I've worked on recently in East New York. So yeah, from my professional experience, that voluntary inclusionary housing program is effective. It gets affordable, and I'll put affordable in quotes, affordable units built.
Okay, and how big was that voluntary inclusionary bonus?
It was not the 200% that you mentioned. It usually goes from, if we're talking about like an R8 A district, it's going from 6.0 to 7.2. So that's a 20% increase, if I can do the math right in my head. So it's not the 200% that you mentioned. I'm not sure where that calculation came from. You might be right, but
No, I'm talking about the MIH programs.
Oh, the MIH programs.
Those have been very big increases in most cases.
I mean, so the work that I've done in East New York, there was a project on Pennsylvania Avenue. It was on the order of 20% increase, and the MIH requirement was 25%. Now, I will admit that my experience as an architect doing affordable housing is not representative of all the housing that's being built in the city. I will freely admit that. So maybe my projects that I've been working on are not, they're certainly not going to be everything that gets built out there, but it is some of what gets built out there.
Okay, well, I mean, we'll certainly be discussing this when the rezoning applications come up for Franklin Avenue and Empire Boulevard. Okay, so Felice?
Hi, yes. I'm listening to all that's going on. I just think the building that's being built today is very discriminatory. Why do I feel that way? When you have buildings being built, yes, it's not affordable. And but in that building, there's two sections. You have one for the poor people, let's say, and one for the rich people. What do I mean? You have the pool, you have the gym, you have the parking space, which is not accessible to the people that are paying a lower rent. Okay, so here you have separatism, racism. It's not nice what's happening. It's not pretty. It's not good, and it's not affordable. It's not even fair. Okay, I just wanted to make that statement because that's what I see.
Okay, thank you, Felice. And I just wanted to say also, even if we do assume that the all of these wealthier districts are going to take up voluntary inclusionary housing bonuses, it's still the case based on the zoning alone that a lot of and the way that these density bonuses have been assigned under the UAP program, that a lot of this is going to be concentrated in the poorest districts, meaning Bronzeville, East New York, and there's going to be a fair amount in kind of middle income districts like ours. And that's just because, like I said, you have this R6 on narrow side streets is getting this huge density bump. And those, I guess those districts just have a lot of that. I mean, there's a lot of public housing, for example, in NYCHA buildings in R6 that are underbuilt to begin with. So that's what my map was based on. It did not even take into account the median incomes because I don't, have all that data right now. So just to share with you again, you can see that, a lot of the districts that do not build right now are not going to be building that much under UAP. And a lot of the districts that have built a lot or are very low income and have already been rezoned are going to be building a lot. I think that's, kind of my point about the way that this particular zoning proposal is structured. But John, you wanted to say something again.
Yeah, thank you. I did, this is I think your map is an interesting study. This is a map that you put together?
Yes.
So you did the legend and okay.
Yes. And, I'm happy to share the data with anyone, to send the map, so you can see what assumptions I made. Obviously there were type things that I simply excluded, like landmark districts. I assumed that co-ops and condos were not going to redevelop anything. And there are proposals within City of Yes that address, for example, landmark districts that we're going to have to talk about probably next session. But, excluding office buildings, for example, because as you can't really calculate the number of units the same way because, a lot of that floor area is not usable. So blah, blah.
So yeah, I would be interested to see your analysis and dig into the details with you.
Yeah.
I would like to clarify something that was in our last land use housing, our land use ULURP meeting, and it was properly recorded by Mia, but I'd like to go back and amend the record if I could, and it's about the AIRS program. And so the AIRS program is a valid zoning type. It has not been halted by HPD. There is a fair housing issue with commingling heirs with multifamily. It becomes an age discrimination thing. There was a privately financed affordable housing for seniors program called PFASH that was suspended. But that was for privately financed projects. The heirs program is typically a different financing program. So heirs is a legitimate program that is currently used and is viable. It has not been halted. And the reason why I think it's important to clarify that is because the majority of the districts that will have this UAP program applied to them are allowing for housing density that is matching the current heirs FAR. So if in an R6 district, you've only got a 2.2 FAR for regular residential, but a 3.9 for heirs, the UAP program is simply saying you can build that 3.9 if you've got the UAP program complied with, if you're doing affordable housing. So what this system is trying to do, the UAP system and the increase of floor area, what it's trying to do is really match the current density that's permitted under the heirs program, but allow it to be applicable to a wider range of housing types, multifamily housing, senior housing, supportive housing. So I appreciate the analysis that you've done and but I think the percentage increase that you're quoting for the R6 districts is a little bit misleading because it's really about matching the heirs program that's currently mapped in these R6 districts.
Right. But again, John, these would not be restricted to, under the text of what they've released so far, these are not restricted to nonprofits that are doing 100% affordable housing, which is, it sounds like what you're saying is who's doing an all senior housing, all affordable residence, that's still okay. They still get a bonus, right? But once again, this particular UAP program is going to be for private developers building mixed income housing with an affordable component to it, right? And that is a new bonus that is not currently allowed under AIRS.
So you dropped
Right,
away there for
you said that the privately financed affordable housing program
Yep.
that is no longer permitted for fair housing reasons. So I assume that what is still being permitted is the nonprofit 100% senior affordable housing typology, right? Like you get whatever. There's some buildings like that.
Well,
But
it's not necessarily for nonprofit developers. I'm working with a for-profit developer that is doing an as of right heirs program. We're going to do 230 affordable senior residences out in Coney Island, and it's a for-profit developer.
it's 100% affordable housing, right? So the
Correct. Yep.
entire Right.
Correct.
So
Yep.
I think the point is that this is a different program. This is not
But it's the
100%
same density.
affordable.
It's the issue I have is with the density. It's the same density that is the heirs density is the same density as the UAP density.
Okay, but
And
what
whether
I'm
it's
going to say
affordable,
is that these 100% affordable developments, there are going to be we know that there are going to be very few of them because they have to be almost entirely subsidized. This is a program that has very wide applicability because it's for mixed income housing. Right, with only like maybe a 25% affordable component, similar to MIH.
so what I'm trying to make clear here is that the current zoning resolution allows for this type of density. It just happens to be for a very particular type of housing model. And I don't think it's healthy for our city to be entirely senior housing. I think it's much more healthy to have
But the point is, John, that is a narrow program and this is not. So if we're looking at the effects of this program in our district and citywide, they're much broader than what is currently permitted under the AIRS program.
So but the heirs program allows for a certain density. And yes, it's a small portion of what I think is good for a healthy housing stock, but the current density is permitted. If someone wanted to build in our R6 district an heirs building on whatever narrow street, they'd be allowed to get the 3.9 FAR and certain
Okay,
heights
but the point is that those are going to be very few and far between. So if you're
I don't know
looking at the
that.
overall impact of the potential numbers, it's a very different thing. You cannot compare the two.
I'm comparing the density that's permitted. That's the point that I'm trying to make. And in prior conversations, there were statements made about whether the heirs program is valid or not. And I just want to correct that statement. And it looks like
Okay, and I
Nicola wants
think,
to say
I
something.
think we probably should also take this discussion to the regular ULURP committee.
Yeah, sure.
Federal fair housing law is one of the subjects that I have on that. And I think it's actually still an open question whether housing preferences for any particular demographic group are violations of fair housing law or not. So yeah, I think that maybe that should be discussed. But anyway, I think we need to move on to the low density proposals.
Nicola has her hand raised, so I think it's worth recognizing her.
Okay, so can I ask first of all if anyone wants to summarize the low density proposals for us?
Hi. Well, first of all, let me just complete my comment related to the discussion you were having, Suki, with John. I agree, John, that the density has been there. It's just that it hasn't been as attractive to many developers to build. The additional FAR that they could get, it wasn't worth it to them from my perspective, which is why we haven't seen a lot of development. With this new UAP, it's going to be much more attractive, and we're going to see more tear downs and rebuilds as a result of it, which I think is what Suki's point has been. And whereas if it was 100% affordable housing being developed, I could see more of the case, but to tear down and rebuild, put all of this additional density, and we only get a few additional units that could actually target the main problem, that's an issue. And that's just going to continue to exacerbate the problem to me, especially if we are already, if we look at Crown Heights, we're already an intensely, densely populated area. As of right development is still taking place, and we are continuing to have significant increases now with UAP on top of it, and the removal of any parking mandates. The quality of life in our area is going to be significantly deteriorating if this goes in, to me. With the density, no parking, no real improvements in terms of infrastructure, et cetera. We'll see what comes out of the environmental impact. But there are a lot of problems with this. Getting back to your low density, Suki, looking at the map and looking at the areas where you've mentioned are 0 to 10% increase, I'm assuming those are the low density areas where we are looking at garage conversions, the additional dwelling units in the backyard. So you can put an accessory dwelling unit in your backyard. You can add a basement, or finish your attic. But it's basically very minimal changes to your property that may add an additional unit that you could potentially rent out or use for family. So no significant changes in terms of density to those areas. So the whole proposal for City of Yes housing was that we're spreading the love, and every community will now participate in addressing this housing issue. And an additional basement, a few basements, whereas Crown Heights will have 60% increases in density, perhaps, that's not going to spread the love evenly across the city, which is part of Borough President Reynoso and others have spoken to us about why this would make sense for New York City, and I'm not buying it right now.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. Anyone else? I think that summary is largely correct. There are some density increases for the low density districts. For example, in the R2 district, the minimum density would go up from 0.5 to 0.75. And on large lots that are within a half mile of a transit station, lots that are greater than 5,000 square feet, they would go up all the way up to a 1.0. So it would be a doubling of density on those lots, potentially allows a second home to be built. It is largely, there are very few homes in our district that would be affected by that. For example, Lefferts Manor, which is where John and I live, most of the lots are under 5,000 square feet. There are a handful that might be 5,000 or more. And most of us are already built well over the 0.5 FAR. So for example, like my house is built to a 0.75 FAR. So I wouldn't get any additional zoning density from this. I think John's house is probably, if you don't mind my saying this, is probably built to like a like one and a quarter or something like that, right, John? And so he wouldn't get any additional zoning density from this. This would have a very significant impact in Eastern Queens or Staten Island, where you have houses that are actually built to a 0.5 density, and many of them are on 5,000, 7,000, 9,000 square foot lots. So, I haven't looked at how many additional units would be added as a result of this. I expect in some areas it would be in the thousands, because these are very large pieces of land. You can see these are just, they're large pieces of land. So even if it's all single family, it could add a number of housing units that are in the thousands. But I don't expect it to have a huge impact in our district. What I did want to talk about that I think is going to have an impact is the accessory dwelling units, the basement units, and the changes to the dwelling unit factor, the changes to permit shared housing. And then, like I said, we'll kind of touch on the office conversions. So for the accessory dwelling units, as Nicholas said, every 1 and 2 family house would be permitted to have an accessory dwelling unit. And that could be either an existing garage that could be converted into residential housing. So for example, I have a detached garage. I could convert that to an accessory dwelling unit as long as it's less than 800 square feet, which it is. It could be up to 2 stories tall. My garage is only 1 story, and I wouldn't have the FAR to add another story, but there are some houses on my block that would. And anybody can use their basement or their attic. So that's pretty much all of the 1 and 2 family houses in our neighborhood could now have legal basement housing. So I would think, I don't know how many single family 1 and 2 family homes there are in our neighborhood, but I would think it's like, a few thousand, maybe like 3, 4, 5, 6,000, something like that. But not more than that. So comments on what people think about accessory dwelling units, whether it's the detached dwelling units or the basement housing. Anybody? I see lots of homeowners on here. Don't all raise your hands at once. Should we allow for legal basement units? Should we allow for people to build an accessory dwelling unit or convert a garage? John?
The accessory dwelling units, if it's outside of the garages.
It could also, basements and attics are also being considered as accessory dwelling units.
But even if you didn't have a garage, I think you could build you could add another building back there, like a pod or something back there.
You could, provided you have sufficient FAR.
Right.
Right. So
the challenge I have is now when you start, to me, all of this is like pieces of a puzzle being put together. So when we have this now, along with the changes that we've made under economic opportunity, where now a percentage of a person's home could be used for their business. And then you could have, so I'm just envisioning someone creating a little backyard venue, and suddenly you have, like an outdoor club, or, something like that. Somebody has a little social gathering place that's open on the weekends in their backyard.
yeah, I absolutely think that will happen. But even even if it's just, let's just say it's strictly residential, right? Many of you, like, if you live in an R5 district, for example, there is going to be a zoning density increase there. I think it'll be about 15%. So you could add to your main house. You could potentially add another story to your house, or you could add a pod in the back, like you said, up to 800 square feet and up to 2 stories tall. How do people feel about that?
So I wanted to respond to
John?
that.
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing. I think it allows for flexibility. It allows for people to be able to bring a aging parent onto where they live. I see it as an economic and kind of um, housing equity measure where people can invest in their homes and invest in their real estate and have this income property. It can be rented, so it helps. I think there's actually an equity component of this where it can help um, families that might not be able to afford a home to be able to have that income property on their property and allow them to self-subsidize their mortgage payments. So I think it will potentially increase home ownership. So I see it as a good thing.
And that's for all types of accessory dwelling units.
Yeah, whether it's a basement apartment, whether it's something in the rear yard, whether it's it's more complicated to vertically expand. But I could definitely see accessory dwelling units having some very positive impact, even if it is going to be something that would happen primarily in these lower density districts that have these lower increments in the UAP plan. And I know you've been presenting this as, not every neighborhood is going to contribute equally, but I think every neighborhood will contribute to solving the problem under this UAP program or something like it. But as long as if you take away the UAP or if you take away the accessory dwelling units, then there's a lot less of that distributed density that can happen.
Janice? Janice?
Hi, I think the accessory dwelling units, I think that's good if that's what people want, but somehow I feel that all of this is really clouding up the main point, which is getting housing that is affordable to the people who are making under $70,000. I mean, it almost feels like you're just throwing crumbs at the homeowners to say, here, you can do this, that with your home. You can do that's good if people want to do it. And I understand, even like John said, you can make additional income. No, I'm not putting my mother in the backyard, but and I'm not putting my mother in the driveway. But I just feel that these are little kibbles that really cloud the major issue. And the major issue is to be able to have housing that people who make under 70,000 can afford. I mean, Suki, the AMI chart that you showed is amazing. And just like the cost of bread and everything else, I know the 2024 chart will also be increasing, but the rent is still too damn high. And I mean, I'm looking at buildings going up. I'm looking at the Spice Factory, looking at the old laundromat. I'm looking at One Sullivan, and those are unaffordable housings. And there is unaffordable housing going up all over, even in Community Board 9 in Bed-Stuy. I do not see it when I drive around to Park Slope, other than Fourth Avenue, having been the sacrificial lamb, but I do not see it in Borough Park. I do not see it in so many places throughout Brooklyn. And I just feel like even looking at that map that you showed, Suki, with the UAP. I mean, it's true. It really is true. And I drive around and, I see it with my own two eyes. I can drive to Park Slope. I can drive to Bensonhurst, where I see there's not the building that's at the level that I'm seeing in Bed-Stuy, in Crown Heights. I'm just not seeing it. So getting back to low density proposals, that's good and fine. If I had a driveway, I wouldn't want to, if I had a garage, I really wouldn't want to put anybody in there, because then you got to get plumbing and all that. And if I didn't have a garage and I wanted to build another unit, then that's expense. I just think all of that just clouds up the main point, which is there needs to be affordable housing. There is so much building going on, and there's always talk about, oh, we don't have enough housing. There is more than enough housing. It's just not for people who make below $50,000. It's not for that. So my point is this: accessory dwelling units, good and fine. Matter of fact, I think the whole city of yes really should be a city of no. And I think it should be a referendum that should go to the public to decide whether or not it should be put forth, and not simply the city council to decide. So that's my take on it. I know I said a lot, sorry, but that's
No,
my
thank
3
you,
minutes.
Janice. That's, all very good points. Anyone else? Vanessa?
I agree with Janice. I'm also fine with basement units, attics, backyard, bungalows, or whatever you want to call it. I think that they're gonna be unaffordable. I mean, the basement units, fine, they might be okay, but if someone's putting all this expenses into turning their garage into an apartment, it's not going to be cheap. And so we still have this affordability issue.
Very true.
And it's just not, this isn't addressing it. I mean, people already have basement units, so to make them legal, like, fine, whatever. But I don't think this is, and also I don't think that the amount of units that this is creating is going to address the bigger issue of how many units are needed. So yeah, I'm for it, but it's just like, it seems like a minute thing in the big need of affordable housing.
Okay, yeah, good point. Anyone else? Okay, I'll say something.
We
So,
had Brittany. Brittany had their hand raised.
oh, okay, I didn't see that. Brittany? I don't actually see Brittany. Ah, here we go. Okay.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for calling that out, whoever saw me. Yeah, so just to add to the conversation of the ADUs, I've heard, several scenarios thrown out there. Yeah, I do agree that it's not going to solve the major problem that we're having. However, I do think that it is absolutely a good thing. Being from Crown Heights, born and raised, there's a lot of the houses in the area have basements and have had those basements for decades prior to it being illegal. So, like, I experienced a situation where my grandparents' home was facing pre-foreclosure and I went to save it. And there was this big fuss about the basement because there's an apartment down there that's been down there And, now they want me to pay all this money to strip it. And that's essentially where I wanted to place my grandmother, who wanted to stay in her home as I was fighting to save it, and utilize the rest of the space to rent it out and allow her to still stay in her home. But I wasn't able to do that due to, the whole ordeal of it being illegal. So honestly, I do think that, there's several different scenarios that I can think of where I would say that it is a good thing. No, it doesn't address the overall crisis that we're having, but I don't see it as a negative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I'll comment, because I, do have one of these garages that could be converted. And yes, I think it would be expensive. I'd have to add plumbing, electricity, insulation. By the time I add insulation, it actually would be an extremely small space. I'm not sure if the amount of space would be legal for a separate unit. Right now I use my garage for storage, but I still need a place to put my car. That's why I bought a house with a garage in the first place. So my car's in the driveway right in front of the garage. And even if my garage were larger, I would never have anyone living there because I think that's dangerous. It's like like the car is right up in front of, where they would have to walk to get in and out of the house. Um, you know, as far as, I think there's potentially enforcement problems. I know there have been issues in the neighborhood over the years with people who had, someone living in their garage without plumbing, without permits, da da da. And at the back of the house, it's going to be very difficult to enforce. And I think that they're saying with these accessory dwelling units that if it's under 3 units, it wouldn't be registered with HPD. So if it's a family member, fine, we get it. You're not going to have your family member living in awful conditions, but it's not restricted to family members. These can be rented out. And so if it's not registered with HPD, what protections do the tenants have, right? And my sister, when she first moved to the city, was living in a basement unit in Astoria that was really dark and dank and nasty, and she was afraid to use the stove because it'll was like I don't know, like jerry rigged or something, and maybe it would have exploded. And there are basements and basements. There are basements that are almost 50% above grade and that are walkout, into the garden at the back, and those are fine and they're probably legal today. But then there are basements that are English basements that have like 2 foot high windows. And in some parts of our neighborhood, there's flooding. So even though we're not coastal, there have been people that had really serious flooding in their basements during very heavy rains, which are expected to become worse with climate change, and it's not safe. And so I think there are with certain types of basements, there's light and air issues, there's flooding issues. Again, when it's a family member, I feel like it's different because they have access to the rest of the house. You're not going to put a big steel locked door between that basement and the rest of the house. They have access to, they might sleep down there, but the rest of the time they would have access to a living room and maybe a kitchen with light and air. They'll be able to exit. They'll have another exit if there's a flood or a fire. Um, so that's my thing. I think that, when it's within a family, it's very common and it's fine, but I'm very hesitant if it's tenants. How do we enforce? How do we supervise? How do we make sure that people are safe? And then not to mention also, John and I live in an area that's deed restricted. So the fact that an additional unit would be allowed would come into conflict with our deed restrictions. And so, on and on. But uh okay. Anybody else? Anybody? Okay, so why don't we address the dwelling unit factor and the shared housing. So the dwelling unit factor is what determines how many units you can have in a particular building, which tends to control the size of the units. Like it's not the same as FAR, right? Because FAR literally just says the number of square feet that you can build. But the dwelling unit factor would limit you from having a lot of very small units, like a lot of studios or a lot of share, like SRO type units. Um, right? So like, for example, in like, let's say 100,000 square foot building, you could, if you have studios of 200 square feet, right, you could have 500 units. But if you're not allowed, if the dwelling unit factor caps you at say 300 units, then you would have to have some larger units, like 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, etc. That's a very, very basic explanation. I'm sure John is going to give us a more specific explanation. John?
Yes, I can give my experience. So the calculations that you presented, first of all, a unit, even an efficiency studio is never any less than 325 square feet. So you'd never really get a 200 square foot studio apartment. But in all of my years of practicing and designing housing, I have never had a project limited by the dwelling unit calculation. It's impossible to get that many units into a building. You've got corridors, you've got stairs, you've got elevators. I think it's a legacy of the 1965 zoning resolution that really has no applicability to our current housing models. SROs don't really even, those aren't dwelling units. They're rooming units. So that doesn't even really, it's an apples and oranges thing. So the dwelling unit calculation, to my mind, is just a completely outdated mechanism within the zoning resolution. So I have no problem with it going because it's not really relevant.
So what you're saying is that there are other rules that do the same thing that the dwelling unit factor does.
Yeah, the floor area and the height limitations are the more controlling elements within the zoning resolution, the bulk sections of the zoning resolution.
So do you think, for example, that removing the dwelling unit factor would allow a building that cannot be all studios now to be all studios if they chose?
I don't think so. I think that you'd still never. I think so. When the 65 zoning resolution was created and put in place, there were not fair housing requirements. There were not ADA accessibility requirements. There were not these things that make the apartments at a minimum 325 square feet for an efficiency studio unit that is, you're just pushing everything to the limit. You've got the minimum amount of storage. You've got the, just everything is within a half inch of the accessibility requirements by the Fair Housing Act and American Disabilities Act. So units have gotten bigger and bigger from that 1965 origination of the zoning resolution. So it's really just not applicable anymore. So it's irrelevant. So I don't think it's not going to allow a building that would be restricted by a dwelling unit count to go from, let's say, 100 units to 120 units. It's just not going to allow that because units are bigger than they used to be. And I realize
That's a very good point. I think that one of the things that the proposal said they were trying to do is to permit rooming units in more zoning districts and to legalize that, to re-legalize them. So there might be some proposals in there to allow more rooming units, and this might really be what that's aimed at.
Maybe.
But maybe we should, maybe that's a question that we need to ask city planning, is whether the elimination of the dwelling unit factor would allow, if there are any circumstances under which this would allow either more housing or more rooming units. Because maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's just sort of like vestigial, like you said. But it might be
Are
worth.
you pointing at something on your, it looks like your cursor is moving. I'm just not sure if you're
Oh,
pointing
okay. No, I'm looking at the draft scope of work
Oh, okay.
to see where they talk about,
We're all seeing your,
to see
We're
where they
just-
might be talking about shared housing units.
We're on the map.
Yeah.
So are we supposed to be looking at the
Oh,
document?
okay. You know what? Let me stop share so that you guys aren't getting this. Yeah, so maybe that's worth a question to city planning, whether the removal of the dwelling unit factor has any effect or not. Okay. So, and what about shared housing? So this is again something that I think we've had SROs in the past, lots of us in our neighborhoods, there are certain townhouses that have been divided into SROs. There are units where somebody has kind of like a little separate apartment that might be the size of a studio, maybe smaller. It's a bedroom, maybe it includes some living space. But it might not include a bathroom or a kitchen. Those might be shared facilities that you have to come out into the hallway to access. But your front door is your front door, and that would be locked. And then you would come and it's your private unit, and then you would come out and share the kitchen or share the bathroom with other residents. So SROs are something that, like, they're grandfathered. They're no longer allowed to be built in new buildings, but they can exist in older buildings, and I think they're subject to like pretty strict rent regulations. And you have to show like that you have a certificate of no harassment if you're trying to convert that building to a Class A building, et cetera. So those tenants are very protected. And so the proposal is to try and legalize more of this housing. What do people think about that? Including for new buildings. John?
so, I think the degree to which we have a housing crisis merits putting everything on the table. And if having SROs is part of that, shared housing, co-housing, whatever you want to call it, I think it makes sense. I realize that's not for everybody. Not everybody wants to live in that sort of situation. But if there are people that will elect to live in that, why not make it a possibility? Whether it's supportive housing, whether it's student housing, I don't know. This is just my perspective. I'd be curious to hear whether I'm missing a big piece of this. That's partly why I joined this community board, so I could get different perspectives.
Okay. Nicola?
I agree with John in that at first I was like, oh no, we don't want to do it, but I know that there are situations in which it does make sense. My father's aunt, has a big house on Union Street that she used to rent out efficiencies. She rented out some of the rooms and they shared the bathroom. These were, professional people or older people that just needed a room, had a little kitchenette, and they shared the bathroom. and it was fine. At first I was thinking, oh no, why would you want to do that? You know, look where we are now. But at the same time, many people are forced to room with strangers. So they, rent a room in an apartment, share the kitchen and bathroom, and it's basically the same thing. They're living with someone in a unit, forced to have a roommate because they can't afford their own apartment. So this might give them a little more security and independence than being forced to rent a room in a 3-bedroom apartment. So I'm open to it, but I think that, again, I want to be careful that we don't get flooded with these types of units, and individuals that want apartments, want space for their families, that suddenly we are just filled with a lot of SRO and community living types of buildings, and we can't accommodate the families, the professionals that want a full apartment.
Okay, thank you. That's a good perspective. Vanessa.
Just a question, why did it become illegal?
That's a good question. I would expect that it was part of the push towards more, it was considered substandard housing, because you don't have your own kitchen and you don't have your own bathroom. You kind of have to go down the hallway. And so it was part of the push to what they called class A apartments. A lot of them were also kind of shorter term rentals. They were being rented like on a 30-day basis and things like that. And so I guess there were maybe concerns that this was transient housing. I would imagine that that's why it was made illegal, but I will do more research on that and get back to you guys. John?
So yeah, I've got a little. I don't have like the full story, but there was a some legal opinion, I think, called the Cornell Doctrine, that was put in place, and it really was meant to transition us away from these kind of institutional housing typologies where people are really like just put into these institutional situations, and it's really substandard. So it's actually it's kind of interesting from a housing policy perspective how kind of the pendulum has swung back. So I do think that there is a possibility of having that same some of the same negative aspects of SROs and institutional living becoming what the future of this might be. But I think on balance, the risks are offset by the potential benefits of shifting back to this type of housing model.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Vanessa, did you want to speak again?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, when I was trying to figure out why it became illegal, I was Googling it and I saw that you're not even allowed to have more than 3 people who aren't related to each other. Like there's a roommate law. So anyway, just a little side note on that.
Yep, we're very familiar with that in Lefferts Manor, because you can rent out the houses, you can have roommates, but there's just a limit, you can't have like 12 people renting the house. But yeah, I share Nicola's concern, that this may actually take over. It's actually, I don't think it's actually cheaper to do these shared housing units than to have a multi-bedroom apartment that's shared by roommates. Because like now with fire code, you've got to put in these big steel front doors that are fireproof into what would be each bedroom. You've got to have sprinklers in the hallways. I've seen some of these old SROs, they're all sprinklered in the hallway. And I think that the landlords put in this extra expense because they actually end up getting more money on a per room basis than they would if they were renting it out as a full apartment. And, you know, if it's a legacy SRO, you know, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But, you know, when we're talking about new construction, I don't really see a good reason for that. Particularly, like I don't see anything here that says that these have to be affordable. And that's another point actually that I wanted to make about all of the low density housing, is that there's zero affordability requirement here. And so I think you know, Janice had an excellent point, is that you know, a lot of this is a red herring, right? There's absolutely no affordability requirement. Um, some of this might be going on already. So we don't even know if this is really going to produce units, because many of the homeowners who were willing to do this might already be doing this. And in order to sort of bring it up to code in other ways, because it would still have to comply with building code and multiple dwelling law, is going to be quite expensive. And I don't think it's going to be affordable. Nicola? Sorry, go ahead.
In the presentation, in the information session, they never mentioned these units as being for the to address affordability. They talked about it taking the pressure off of the bigger apartments that families could use. So instead of having 3 roommates sharing a 3-bedroom apartment, they would go into these SRO type of facilities, and then those 3-bedroom apartments would now be available for families. That's the way it was positioned. It wasn't positioned, from the way I recall, in terms of addressing affordability or being affordable units.
Yeah, that's a good point. Although I kind of don't see why, if you wanted to make more apartments available for families as well as for singles, right? There's nothing that's stopping you from building a building full of 3-bedroom apartments and then renting it out to whoever wants it, right? Unless, John, is there anything that would prevent that?
But are you talking about affordable units, or are you talking about just market rate?
Just market rate, right? Because these shared housing units are supposed to be at market rate.
Mm-hmm.
So what's right? If you think, right, if there's a problem that, you know, young people are taking up 3-bedroom apartments, why don't we just have more of them? I mean, and you know, this is assuming that these same young professionals would be more willing to take these SRO type units.
I mean, I can see those units going towards seniors as well. I mean, there are a number of, there are many people that could benefit from those types of units. I'm just afraid that our communities will begin to be flooded with them.
Which some communities at one point were. I mean, like, I think Bed-Stuy
Yeah.
at one point was fairly inundated with SROs in the townhouses.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that, you know, traditionally the neighbors really fought against, for better or worse.
I think John has a.
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to respond a little bit to what you said about, you know, why wouldn't someone build 3-bedroom units? And I think that there's like the fundamentals of the marketplace and what is in demand. There's usually a market study that's done by a developer before they build in a community, and they understand what the needs are, what the demand is. So I think for a lot of your questions, I think the market will drive these, what gets produced. You also tried to, I think we were trying to relate, like, what do these SROs potentially mean? How would that relieve the pressure or make it more viable for family units to be in a community? And I just think what it does is it meets a certain demand within a market, and it allows for other buildings, either whether they're built new or renovated, it allows them to calibrate to that other component, that family demand. So it's not like anything's going to change overnight. This happens, a neighborhood, a community evolves. So that's why I think this type of housing typology that allows for people, whether it's students, whether it's seniors, whether it's somebody who just needs like a little bit of a break on their rent check so that they can like restabilize their life. So I think having this option as a housing option is a good thing.
It is, okay, thank you. It is almost 9 o'clock. Do we have anything else that we want to go over on either the basement, attic, shared housing, backyard dwelling units, the low density proposals? Buddy? Okay, so I'm just gonna then throw out the final aspect that was presented to us at the last information session, which was about office conversions. Essentially, I'm sure you've all heard that there's a lot of office buildings in Manhattan that have a lot of vacant space now because people are working from home or companies have moved out of New York and people are working from anywhere. And so the building owners, many of them would like to convert this space to residential housing, and the city is willing to do that. But there are some restrictions on that. One of them is that only buildings that were built before a certain date, I think it's before like 1961, maybe currently are allowed to be converted. And so the proposal is to change that to buildings up to 1990. And I don't know if there might have to be some other like relaxation of light and air laws and so on. But I also sent out a link to an article to the subcommittee members. Right now, the city has what they call an office conversion accelerator program, and there are 45 buildings that are in the accelerator program. Um, and office buildings are very, very, very large buildings. From the few conversions that I've seen so far, they're averaging like 200 or 300 units per building, even given that not all of the floor area can be used. So from those 45 buildings alone, which is just so far without even any of these zoning changes, that's probably 9 or 10,000 units of housing in these commercial areas in Midtown and downtown Manhattan. They're also proposing expanding the conversion geography. So like, for example, there might be buildings in downtown Brooklyn or downtown Queens or wherever it is that could be converted. Nicola?
I go back to the question we keep coming back to. How many of these units would truly be affordable for the target audience, the people that really need housing? I think they mentioned in one of the information sessions, one of the converted buildings as 180 Water in Manhattan. That place, I worked in that building. It's right on the waterfront, beautiful. It's a full glass building, beautiful views of the bridge, of the skyline for Brooklyn. Those are not affordable units. That's luxury housing. So if we're talking about Midtown conversions, Wall Street conversions, this is not affordable housing.
Good point. John?
Spot on, Nicola. We've studied this. We've looked at what it would take. And as soon as you like touch anything, the budget just goes out the window and it can't be done on an affordable housing budget. So this is really a housing solution for a very specific, as we often call it in my office, non-affordable housing. So nobody should be under the impression that this is going to help solve affordable housing capacity. It will, however, satisfy a certain portion of the housing need, which relieves pressure throughout the whole system. So, you know, to be honest, there aren't that many projects or that many buildings, if any, in our neighborhood. So if we're really going to like limit our brain cells to how our community is going to be impacted, I think we should just like put this thing to the side, no comments. It's almost 9 o'clock. We should focus on things that are really relevant for CB9.
So on that note, maybe the takeaway is, CB9 wants to see how many truly affordable units there are, and maybe we just say no to the rest. Okay, so and next time I would expect that we're going to talk about the missing middle housing, as well as possibly transfer of development rights in landmark districts. Oh, Felice. Felice, did you want to say something?
Okay, yes, please. Can we speak on low income? Can we name it that than affordable? Because it's really low income. I mean, I'm a union person, and I meant to say this, that my members, they make $50,000 if $60,000 a year. You can't afford any of the things that you're speaking on. I want to be real about that. Okay, and you spoke of density. This is correct. They shouldn't have their focal point in areas such as this where we are right now, which you have spoke on, and I was listening intensively about it. No, is why this area? And the density will be so bad. You're talking about crime? We're already dealing with crime in Edwardsville. Okay? Density, you're talking about food shortage. Okay, you're talking about waste. You're talking about water. Sewage, that's what I meant to say. Okay? Come on, please, let's be real. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. Please. Thank you.
Thank you, Felice. I think that's a, pretty good summary. So thank you guys all for being here. And I'll see you next time. Definitely watch out for the next city planning information session. I think it's March 27th. The next ULERP meeting, next couple of ULERP meetings, we may have presentation. Janice, there's a list on the last minute. Thank you. Janice?
Hi, I just wanted to clarify something. The housing committee and this subcommittee is replacing the regular housing committee from March?
No, Erin told me that she would be holding a separate housing committee meeting this month.
Oh, that wasn't what I got in the email. I got in the email that the housing committee was going to be having a meeting tonight with the subcommittee, and that this meeting that we're on now would replace the one that would be held in that would normally have been scheduled for March. So now you're telling me that there's going to be a separate scheduled housing meeting for March.
Okay, you guys need to talk to Erin and to the office, because Erin had originally suggested a joint meeting, which I agreed to. I suggested this date. She agreed to it. I guess the meeting notice got sent out quite late. And so she told me today, like, I don't think I'll be able to come, and I'm planning on holding a separate meeting. And I don't know how many people will come, but a lot of you did show up, for which I'm happy and I'm grateful. But I can't.
Okay, I know you cannot speak for Erin, but now she's got to modify or revise what was put out, because I'm here at this meeting because based on the email that I got, it said that the housing meeting would be merged with this meeting, with the subcommittee meeting for March, and therefore there would be no housing meeting. So now what I'm hearing is that Erin's going to have a housing meeting, and I do notice that she's not here. I'm not even sure how many. I see a few people who are on the housing committee, But I'm just like, I'm not like trying to be at every meeting at every minute. And I was under the, impression that this was replacing the housing meeting. So that's got to be clarified. Mia, I know you're on, and I hope that can be clarified because
Sure
this would
thing,
not.
Ms. Random. I'll definitely connect with Erin tomorrow and I'll get a note out to the committee to determine what she's going to do for March. Sorry for any confusion.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Well,
Yeah.
this is a subcommittee that has never replaced the regular. So we have a regular ULURP committee meeting, and then we have this subcommittee that was with the economic development for a few months, and now we've switched over to housing. But, we have 2 meetings a month so far for the last umpteen months.
Yeah.
So
And
I feel your pain, but it's what we all been having to do.
And we actually have a couple members also who are from economic development. And just like, it's not mandatory for anyone, but people asked to be on this committee as liaisons, and I'm very supportive of that. I, do think these are very wide-ranging proposals, and as many people as possible should know what's going on. But I do, want to caution if it comes time to taking votes, we'll have to think about the procedure for doing that if it's an official joint meeting, versus, somebody could be made a member of the subcommittee, like Unella was made a member of the subcommittee. So, we'll just have to think about that. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. John, so moved.
Second by Nicola.
Thank you. Okay, all right. Good night, everybody, and thank you, everyone, for coming. It was
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thanks. Good night.
Yeah.